John, we're here for the second mobile broadcast. I had an opportunity after David Hawkins' show to get a couple tweaks going. We should be a little bit technically better than I was earlier today. Welcome to the Road Trip Studio, John. How are you today?
Well, thank you, Jason. How are you doing? I like this Road Trip Mobile Studio setup. I'm impressed.
Thanks. I'm just noticing certain differences between this and New York. Obviously, the hotel doesn't have the internet speed that I have back in New York, but I'm also not being accosted by maniacs who want to kill me or force me to engage in prophylactic medical procedures that I'm not personally a fan of. People who are seeing us for the first time, John, may not know that you and I are doing a sponsor exclusive show every Friday. People are going to be able to see that in just 30 minutes on subscribestar.com/IamJohnCullen, patreon.com/IamJohnCullen, and subscribestar.com and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. We got a little bit of a slight variation on our theme today. We're looking into think tanks, which I'm glad you selected this topic because I'm really interested in these think tanks. I'm wondering what the hell they're thinking.
Yeah, me too. And the thing that I find troublesome about it is that they're guiding policy for major corporations, right? So a lot of these big think tanks
And governments.
Indeed. And so we're gonna get into that tonight, in particular in our patron-only show. Typically, our patron-only show has been running about an hour and a half lately. So when we break away from this YouTube half-hour show or 27-minute show or whatever this is, we go to Patreon and to Subscribestar. And typically those shows have been running over an hour, an hour 10, hour 20, hour 30 lately. In the show that we're doing today, we're going to look at Stratfor, we're going to look at Brookings, we're going to look at the Lowy Institute in Australia, and we're going to ask ourselves, are these leaders well informed? Do they have the facts? And hypothetically speaking, what if they didn't? What if they thought they had the facts, but what if they had been fooled? And what if they were given guidance to corporations and governments based on misinformation? What would the ramifications of that be? And that's what you and I are going to explore together, because I've got a bone to pick with one particular character. You've got some stories to relay about a number of these guys.
Yeah.
And I haven't heard your stories at all. I've heard you mention the characters. I've heard you mention the character names. I've heard you mention them by name. I don't know the backstory at all, and I wanted to mention to the audience, you did a show a week ago. You were walking in a snowstorm in New York. I don't know if you can pull that up on YouTube.
Yeah.
Can you show people you were walking around New York City and you had like snow in your eyebrows. You looked like that guy from 60 Minutes that used to wrap up the show with his grouchy thing.
Oh, yeah.
You had
What was that? Andy,
your eyebrows.
something or other.
Yeah. So in this show, as you were walking around New York, you were relaying the story of what was happening when you were in Charleston.
Right.
And I'm listening. I was watching the show. I don't remember if I was watching it live or, a couple hours delayed or whatever. But I was watching it and listening, and I'm listening to you relay the story. And I'm like, what? I've heard you mention these characters again, these names of these guys in the lawsuits. I didn't know any of that backstory. That was before Vegas.
That's true.
So I didn't know any of this. And so I'm watching you walk around the snow, and you're talking about what happened in Charleston. And my jaw was hanging down. I was like, are you kidding me? This is one hell of a story. I want to know more about this, right? So, not necessarily in this show, but at some point, please, you need to grace us with what the hell went on there, because I'm assuming now you've got at least twice as many subscribers as you did back when
far
it
more
happened.
than that.
All right, so I'm assuming if I didn't know any of this backstory,
A lot of people don't. Yeah.
yeah. I think we need to do a show where you've got to help all of us know what is this backstory. I mean, these lawsuits, and I mean, I was blown away when you were telling the story Walking in the Snow. So for those of you who haven't seen that walk and talk of Jason's in the snowstorm in New York City, that's absolutely worth watching this weekend if you haven't seen it yet.
Well, thank you for that shout out, John. And we were talking about this while I was driving last night, and it occurred to me that you're absolutely right. There are a lot of people who don't know about that. And I mean, it's a nice little slice of history because all of these stories are so complicated. The Port of Charleston thing and my involvement is not even a dot on the dot of a dot of the story of history. But you're right that that experience and everything that's happened since then informs a lot of what I see around us today. And it's also helped me learn a lot about social engineering, something that we talk about really pretty frequently on our show. And you've inspired me to definitely get back into it. It is very relevant to a lot of the lawsuits that have been brought against me. So I got to be kind of careful how I speak about it, not because I'm fearful of anything other than the massive inconvenience of these guys who attempt to make hay out of absolutely anything by engaging in lawfare, which is a pretty well-known practice of weaponizing the legal system against your enemies. It can be done in the civil realm with regular lawsuits, and it can be done by governments when they bring, fraudulent criminal charges against somebody. But you're right, I think we'll need to schedule another show for that. We're going to be talking today about these think tanks, and they do play into social engineering and lawfare. The Brookings Institution actually is the sponsor of the lawfare blog, and we're going to talk about some of those guys. Before we do, I want to remind our viewers who perhaps haven't seen John before, they can subscribe to his YouTube channel at John E. Hoover. And John's been doing a series tributes to the heroes of the pandemic. Great interview with Dr. Scott Jensen. Really an admirable guy, a role model to people, because this is just a moral guy who's willing to risk his entire career to do what's right. And that is kind of the exact opposite of what we're seeing in so many people, irrespective of what profession they might be in. So I really do appreciate Scott Jensen, and John's been doing a great series there. Why don't we fill everybody in, John, on what they're going to see in just about 20 minutes on Patreon and Subscribestar?
Yeah, and for those of you who aren't aware of Dr. Jensen's work and what he brought forward, he's the doctor that came forward that said, isn't this a little bit awkward that the hospitals are getting reimbursed for COVID patients? And when he brought that story forward, Dr. Fauci said, well, that's kind of a conspiracy theory. And Dr. Jensen said, well, it's not, it's just, these are the reimbursement facts, right? And the facts were that if a hospital admitted a COVID patient, the federal government would reimburse that hospital $13,000. And if that patient was intubated, it would go from 13 to 39, not additive. 39,000 is 3 times 13.
Wow.
So the hospital would either get, So the hospital would either get 13,000 or 39,000 based on whether or not the admission was intubated. And then if the hospital admitted 100 or more patients by a certain date, I think it was in June, but I could be wrong, there was a $77,000 per patient additional reimbursement.
It's crazy.
So
John, you spent a lot of time in sales. This sounds like a spiff.
And that was, without saying it, the read between the lines message was there's opportunity here. And Dr. Redfield kind of confirmed it. I think, I forget if it was in front of the Senate or the Congress, but Dr. Redfield testified and said, yeah, we kind of saw this during HIV as well. Wow. Doctors were not doctors, hospital administrators were gaming the system. It wasn't doctors. It's the administrators that are on the P&L. They've got a profit and loss statement.
Right.
And if the government is going to reimburse them 77,000
They want that
and they
money.
have to get to 100 patients. Right. So now you tell me what's the incentive to run your tests through a laboratory that tends to return negatives? I need 100 admissions. I got two laboratories down the street. One's on Main Street, one's on Maple Street. One of those labs, 60% of the tests are coming back positive. The other lab, 91% are coming back positive.
That's your
I've
lab.
only got 2 weeks. I've only got 2 weeks left to hit my 100, or I don't get the 77,000. If I have 91 admissions, I don't get 77,000 per. All right, so that's the story Dr. Jensen brought forward. And so to me, he's a hero. And and they went after his license because of it.
Yeah,
So
they
when
still
people
are, as far as I understand, and he's no longer
right,
in the Minneapolis State
he
Senate.
stepped down. Right. So when
Just to
people
clarify for a
give me
minute, John, because
grief,
some people weren't
yeah,
clear, intubating is when somebody goes on a ventilator, you put that tube down their throat. And a spiff, a sales spiff, is a specific promotion, like if somebody wants to push a particular piece of software, every salesman who moves a copy of this software gets an additional $50 spiff this month, just to motivate people to sell it.
hmm So to me, he's a hero, and I basically launched a series called Heroes of the Pandemic. He risked his career, and one of the things I was going to say is people give me grief about the hat and the sunglasses, but it's because of the ad hominem attacks. They go after the person. You've been experiencing it via lawfare. He experiences it via his license. He had to step down from his Senate position. So
Well,
they
that's
go
lawfare.
after the person.
They're
They
going
go
after. I
after the
mean,
person.
somebody
They go
somebody
after
drives up
people.
to your house and shoots the place up and kills you. That's just straight warfare. But using the governmental systems, revoking somebody's medical license, I mean, that's a legal process to take away. He's legally licensed to be a doctor. They take that away.
Right.
The guy can't work. He's at an
Indeed.
age where getting retrained to be something that's not a doctor is pretty difficult to do. And I think a lot of people who dedicate
Mhm.
their lives to a career like being a doctor or a stereoscopic cinematographer, when you leave that career, you've dedicated so much time and attention to those skills, you're really not very qualified to do much else. So taking away somebody's medical license is taking away their ability to earn money and basically killing them slowly.
It's ruthless, and he's not the only one. The point is, he came forward with this set of information. You remember all the other doctors that were coming forward with information that were getting their YouTube videos taken down. And so, when you're a doctor, when you're a physician who's taken, this Hippocratic oath, and you've got the best interest of patients, and you're trying to spread the word of something, uh, it, there's a certain phenomenon that happens. And it feels like if you know something about this, like you and I do, right? So at this point, I believe we know why the majority of people are dying. And it has to do with a co-infection. And that seems to be the most deadly scenario. We know about XX versus XY chromosomes. We know about ages and things like that. So this past week, I was also really fortunate to have another hero of the pandemic, a guy by the name of Ivor Cummins. And Ivor is based out of Ireland, and he's like a former chemical engineer. He has a very similar background to me with the manufacturing, except his manufacturing background was more chemicals and process engineering, but very, very similar background. And the audience kept sending me all these messages saying, you two have got to get together. You're both doing charts and numbers and columns and tables. And he's having doctors on his show, and they're pulling data from UK Health Ministry. They're doing the same thing we're doing. Mm-hmm. And so the audience, in a crowdsource the truth manner, went after Ivor Cummins and said, Ivor, you've got to see this stuff. And they sent him links to our work and what have you. And he looked at it and goes, oh, yeah. I kind of know who those guys are, whatever. And so we recorded a show earlier this week, and it's a tribute to him. And he's a guy who had a successful YouTube business. He was a podcaster. And his whole thing was about nutrition and keto and these complex
Prior to the
carbohydrates. And
pandemic. Yeah.
yeah. And so he had a business and was supporting his family. He's a married guy. He's got 5 kids, and he's doing that. And then the pandemic hits. And because of his background, similar to me, where he kind of knows, he's a root cause analysis guy, right? So we both come from this process engineering background. We both do root cause analysis. So we speak the same language, and we're doing very, very similar analyses. The only thing is, you and I lucked into somehow the coroner data. And if it wasn't for that coroner data, we would not have broken this case. That single system is the root cause of how we broke the case. And as a result of that data, everything followed. And I shared that with him, and he was fairly stunned, but not surprised. But I will tell you that even someone like him, who, and by the way, he has 171,000 subscribers over at his channel. If you go over to, I think on Twitter, he's known as the Fat Emperor, and he has a website called the Fat. No. It's like a concept, the concept of the Fat Emperor, and how, the emperor eats steaks and butter and eats rich foods and what, he'll explain all that. But he's a really bright guy and well-meaning, and he's got 5 kids, and he's got a successful YouTube podcast about nutrition and, helping people who, in particular, who are diabetic. He kind of helps diabetic people get their thing under control. So
That's
really
good
guy. And yeah, so he came on the show. We did a great interview together, and I shared with him these insights that we've had. And the part 2 of this show, I have to finish editing, render, upload to YouTube. I'll be doing that while a lot of you guys are sleeping. But what I'll probably do is make it available to all of our Patreon and Subscribestar patrons at the I Am John Cohen Patreon and I Am John Cohen Subscribestar. I'll make it available to my subscribers there early, and then part 2 will probably go live sometime this weekend, either Saturday or Sunday, New York time.
Great. Yeah, actually, Joey in Detroit, John, is asking if you have yet implemented annual subscriptions on Subscribestar. That was a beta program that they started at my request, and it's been through kind of an evolution. I now have an entire interface. Like it used to be, I have to email their tech support, and they would activate the subscription. But now when people go to the Counter Lawfare Fund page on crowdsourcethetruth.com, they can purchase a sponsorship that includes annual subscriptions. I guess the answer to the question is we don't know yet if it's even possible for you to offer that. Have you looked into it at all, John?
Not quite yet, because I still haven't packaged up all those PDFs. I was hoping to have it done. Yeah, for the subscribers, I'm taking all these show notes. You have that PDF deck I sent you? Why don't we show everybody a slide or 3 from that deck? And what I'm doing is I'm packaging up all of these show notes that I prepare for Jason each week. There's about 50, 60 pages of content. And you can go to the next page. Yeah, we showed everybody Ivor's stuff, right? They saw Ivor's page. So that those videos are up. We talked about remdesivir and how the World Health Organization has rejected it. And yet that's the only approved therapeutic treatment for coronavirus in the United States. So we've got a little bit of an impasse here. This is, I guess in the movies, they would call it a Mexican standoff. But
what's the difference between a Mexican standoff and just a regular standoff? Because they seem the same.
I don't know, but there was a great movie with Denzel Washington and was it Christopher Walken and a little kid, Dakota Fanning?
Oh yeah, he's like her bodyguard or something like that.
Yeah. Man on Fire. And there's a Mexican standoff at the last scene on the bridge. It's a fantastic film.
But
one of Denzel Washington's best. I don't know. It's just a term. I have no idea. But speaking of that, I want to go through a couple slides before we have to go Patreon only, because people need to know what we're going to see, because it's kind of crazy tonight. So please, yeah. They got to see the slides, because I want people to understand. We're going to be talking about the Brookings, but we're also going to be possibly mobilizing Black Lives Matter tonight. And that's really important. So I want to get to that. All right, the vaccine, important for everybody to understand that the vaccines from Moderna and Pfizer, if you go to their page, you go to the Pfizer page or the Moderna page, they're going to tell you that it's not FDA approved. It's FDA approved with an emergency use authorization. And what that means is you have to sign a form in order to get the vaccine. So make sure you know and watch this video from the FDA on what this is about and what does that mean. What's the difference between an FDA-approved vaccine and a vaccine that's emergency use authorization? Because there is a difference, right? So let's make sure we know that before we go
And by the
giving
way,
it to
all
children.
the vaccines now are emergency. There's none that are approved yet, right?
Correct. That's correct. And in particular, the clinical trials were not done on kids. So under 12, they didn't do clinical trials. So, easy tiger, right? Everybody needs to read the paperwork, read the inserts, read what you're signing. That's and ask your doctor, because this show, we don't do any medical advice here. The only medical advice that I think we will ever give you is ask your doctor.
Right.
That's it.
And that's not medical advice. That's common sense advice.
Right. So that's it. Ask your doctor. Let's go to the next slide real quick, because we're going to run out of time here and I want people to see what we got. So here's your emergency use authorization information. There's a whole bunch of good stuff out there. So this is in the deck. Let's go to our next slide. All right, so where do we stand right now? California just eclipsed New York in total deaths. Congratulations to Gavin Newsom. You're now #1. So Gavin Newsom in California has more people dead than any state in the United States. Congratulations to him, with 46,000 people dead. New York with 45,700. Texas with 40,000. Florida 28, and Pennsylvania with 23. Let's go to the next slide in the deck and see, how does California and New York and these states, how do they hold up to other countries? So let's look at Peru, Poland, Indonesia with 275 million people has fewer people dead than California or New York. Turkey with 85 million people has fewer people dead than California or New York. The Ukraine with 43.5 million people appears to be laughing at New York, California, and Joe Biden. Belgium, Canada with 37.9 million people, right, has fewer people dead than New York. Chile, Romania, right? These are actual countries. What about Iraq? Iraq is laughing at Cuomo. Iraq, with a population of 40 million people, has 13,000 dead. All right, so how did Iraq outperform Cuomo, and Cuomo got the Emmy? How is
what
that
about
possible?
Sweden with no lockdown? 12,000. What's the population of Sweden?
So the population of Sweden is a little bit more than New Zealand, right? So about 5.5 million people, similar to
John?
middle of states. There's a lot of states with 5 million. Minnesota, Ohio.
Sweden, it says
states
10
like that.
million.
So a bunch of states with 5 million.
10,380,000 in Sweden.
Population?
So it's about half the size of New York, with about less than a third of the deaths.
Yet in the right-hand column on Worldometers, what you're looking at on the table for COVID, it says 5,500,000. Oh, there it is, 10. Okay.
Yeah.
Sweden. Oh, I was looking at the wrong column. Okay, I was looking at total tests. I didn't see the far right column. Forgive me. All right, so Iraq, 40 million. Sweden, 10 million. So who has 10 million population in the States? I don't know. But look at the next one down. Who has 223 million people? What was that state? What was that
Pakistan.
country? 220. Pakistan. So Pakistan has a fraction of the deaths of New York, of New Jersey, of Pennsylvania. That's good. That's very impressive. Impressive work there. What about Egypt? There's 100 million people in Egypt.
Wow.
And Egypt has less than 10,000 dead.
Maybe it doesn't like the desert.
What did Egypt do that Gavin Newsom didn't do? That's all I want to know. What did Egypt do that Gavin Newsom didn't do? I don't know.
Huh.
Let's go next slide.
Joey in Detroit is telling us that they might stripped the Emmy away from Cuomo. That's interesting.
That's not fair. That's not
I
fair.
mean,
He
that's
earned it.
ridiculous.
He earned
Why'd
it.
they give it to him in the first place?
Well, yeah. So given that California just took over #1 position, I'm hearing a bunch of white noise in the background. Just so you know.
The heater just came on, and I don't have any of my noise cancellation. There's a lot of fancy stuff that goes on in the studio in New York that people may not appreciate, that's incredibly difficult to recreate here in the hotel room. But almost everything I'm using, I mean, I have all the previous equipment, but there's a bunch of new stuff that I purchased specifically to make the road trip studio a more enjoyable experience for the audience. And John, we're really going to have to continue this on subscribestar.com/IamJohnCullen and patreon.com/IamJohnCullen. And of course, subscribestar.com and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, because we've got to cut right now because it needs some time it's slower here at the hotel than in New York because of the internet. But thanks for watching, everybody. We'll be back in just 4 minutes to finish up looking at this slide deck and get in depth on these think tanks and what the hell they're thinking. It doesn't make any sense to me. See everybody.